Chapter 2 will talk about sociological research. Today I'm going to define the scientific method, introduce reliability and validity, and talk about different ways of doing research. Here are some examples, which include surveys, field research, experiments, and secondary data analysis. So sociological research is the way that sociologists investigate human behavior, and through that investigation, they give us insights into human societies. The scientific method, then, is a tool that is used by sociologists to investigate human behavior. This tool is actually used by the natural sciences, which are those careers where you study biology, physics. We are actually in the social sciences. So this tool is used to study human behavior. And you start by basically asking a question. So if you're a person that is curious about human behavior, research may be one of the careers where you may want to get training so that you can be one of those future researchers. So you ask a question, and my question is, do high school students engage in sexual activity before graduating high school? That's my question. Then I go and do research. So, for example, I look at the literature. I look to see what other sociologists have discovered in doing research that is similar or the same as mine. And then once I look at all of that literature, once I go and research what information is out there, then I form an educated guess. It's called a hypothesis. So my educated guess is that the majority of students engage in sexual activity before they graduate high school. Then I go and test my hypothesis by either doing research in surveys, or I do research where I go and interview students, and then I draw my conclusion based on the investigations that I have done. And my investigation basically says that maybe half of the students engage in sexual activity before they graduate high school. So I was wrong in saying that the majority, it's usually half. And so then I report my findings using this tool. In order for research to be considered as something that is worthwhile, it has to pass the rigor of two words. It has to be reliable. In other words, the research has to obtain the same results over and over again. So if I want to know if elderly people that are active, that if they are healthy because they're active, I do my research and I find out that yes, according to my research, elderly people who are active tend to be healthier. Then somebody else does similar research and they come up with the same findings. Then we can say these results are reliable, but they also have to be valid. So in other words, whatever I said that I'm going to investigate, then that's what I investigate. So if I'm interested in knowing if elderly people are healthier when they're active, I would not be showing results for 10-year-olds because elderly people are probably, I would define what they would be. I would say probably 65 years old. So giving results for 10-year-olds would not be valid. There are different ways of doing research and different tools that are used. So in one of the tools is surveys. This is the most common and the one that probably you are most familiar with. So when you do surveys, it can take the form of written surveys where it's a questionnaire where you ask people to answer A, B, or C, or agree, strongly agree, disagree. And or you could have interviews. Interviews then are where you actually sit with a person and you ask them how they're feeling and thinking at this point in time. This tool is very effective in research because it can be less costly when you do, for example, a questionnaire. However, when you do interviews, that can be a good tool because it gives you in-depth information, but it can actually be more costly. Another tool for doing sociological research is field research. This is where sociologists study people in their natural setting. One way is called participant observation, where the researcher goes into the group and they may or may not tell the group that they are being observed. So they immerse themselves in the culture, in the group, in the setting, so that they can get very rich data. Now, this can bring some ethical questions. For example, if I want to know about gang activity and how gangs tend to structure themselves, I could be a participant observation and not tell the group that I'm researching them, or I could tell the group that I am. And so different consequences will be the result of that choice. Ethnography then is when participants describe how they view themselves. So it's a way where individuals may tell the researcher who is in their communities, who is studying them in a natural setting, how they feel about themselves. And the last one is doing case studies. This is an in-depth analysis of a single event. So the picture that I have here is of a hurricane, and I have that because during what was called Hurricane Katrina, when that hurricane hit the coast of Louisiana, it created a single event where people were impacted deeply. So that would be an example of a case study of a single event. Another way of doing sociological research is to do experiments. Experiments are tricky because it is no longer allowed for people to do experiments on individuals without them knowing. But experiments can bring a lot of rich information, and you're going to read about an experiment in action once you get in depth into this chapter. Finally, another way of doing sociological research is by looking at data that's out there in the community or the society. One of the biggest sources of data is the US Census data. It's very important in collecting this information because that's how the society knows how many people are in the country, where services may be needed. Our society uses a lot of secondary data. Other type of secondary data are things like medical data, school data, data for just about anything that you can think of. Now, more and more data is being collected through social media and the use of applications that we use through our technology. So a researcher would go to the government, say, for example, and ask permission to use that data, and the government may say, yes, you have to sign a disclaimer that you're going to use the data for this or that you're not going to hurt people. And so secondary data is a good source because somebody else has already done the economic side of it. And so it is relatively inexpensive. Finally, we come to the ethics of doing data or of research. It is very, very important because when we do research, when we study human beings, sometimes we may find information that goes contrary to our closely held beliefs. And so it's important as a researcher to remain impartial, to not, as much as you can, to not influence the results by personal biases and personal belief systems. And it's important to disclose whatever research one gets or whatever research findings one gets, even if they contradict our own personally held belief systems.